Alright, back to another video. It's episode 2 of Every Album Ranked. And I'm going to be ranking every album from Rise Against from least best to overall best. Luna is joining me for this video, and she's right there in case you didn't see. Anyways, I have every single album from Rise Against right here. And I've already done reviews on each of these. And there's going to be a playlist for my album review series in the description, in case you want to check that out. Before I rank all these albums, I'd like to mention that this is only my personal opinion regarding them, and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of everyone else. I'm not saying any of these albums are bad, because they're all at least good. Anyways, let's get on with the list. Starting this list with my least favorite Rise Against album, which is The Unraveling from 2001. So it's the band's debut album. It was also the very first album I ever reviewed. This album is also 20 years old at the time of me making this video. It's also the shortest album that Rise Against ever made. Although it's not as good or as political as the material that Rise Against would make going forward, I still enjoy it for what it is. And we're going to set this aside for now. Now, moving up, we're going to talk about Siren Song and the Counterculture from 2004. This was the third album from Rise Against, and it's their second in a series of albums that were made in protest of the Bush administration. Of course, this album features the song Give It All, which happens to be a staple of the band's live shows. At the time of me making this video, this is still the only Rise Against album to be produced by Garth Richardson, who has also worked with Rage Against the Machine, Melvins, L7, Ugly Kid Joe, Mudvayne, and Chevelle, among others. Now, it's not as good as Revolutions Per Minute, but I still enjoy it for what it is. More on Revolutions Per Minute later. Now, next up is The Black Market from 2014, which is the band's 7th studio album. Rise Against seemed to have gone more in the realm of alternative rock on some of the songs on this album, though People Live Here is fully acoustic, but that's a different story. I remember one critic compared this album to the sound of Foo Fighters, which is a pretty accurate description if you ask me. What's interesting is that Rise Against were promoting this album when they went on tour in 2014. I got to see them in concert back on October 5th of that year. And that's actually the last show of that concert. That's actually the last show of that tour. This is also the last Rise Against album to be released under Interscope. Overall, this is a good album, but there's even better material that these guys have made. Now, the next album we'll discuss is Revolutions Per Minute from 2003. This was the band's second album and their first anti-Bush album. I mentioned in my review this was the first album that Rise Against made where lead singer Tim McElrath served the role as rhythm guitarist, and he's still serving that role to this day. I don't know what it is, but there's something about the sound that makes me think it's even better than Siren Song with the Counterculture. It's still a great album overall. One more thing I should mention is that this was the last Rise Against album to be released under Fat Records. I'll set that aside for now. Moving up, we're going to talk about The Sufferer and the Witness from 2006. Now, this was the band's fourth album, the third anti-Bush album that they made, and the first of their albums that I ever listened to. I mentioned in my review this was also the first Rise Against album to have a parental advisory warning on the cover. This is mainly because the song Survive has multiple uses of the word fuck. It's also the last Rise Against album that would be released under Geffen. I really like this album, and we're moving forward from here. Up next, we're going to talk about Appeal to Reason from 2008. So it's the fifth studio album from Rise Against, their first album released under Interscope, their first album with Zach Blair as the lead guitarist, and their fourth and final anti-Bush album. Now, some critics point out that Rise Against went for a more radio-friendly sound this time around, but I think it's even better than the band's previous albums in many ways. Now, the next album was Long Forgotten Songs, B-Sides and Covers from 2013. This was the band's first compilation album, and it's a collection of B-sides and covers that Rise Against made between 2000 and 2013. To this day, this is still the longest album that Rise Against have ever made. Now it's a compilation album, but you get what I mean. I'm hoping that Rise Against will release another compilation album of B-sides and covers at some point. It's also the second Rise Against album to have a parental advisory warning on the cover. Now, moving up is talking about the Ghost Note Symphonies, Volume 1 from 2018. This was the band's second compilation album, even though it may not seem like that at first. This is the band's first fully acoustic album, and it consists entirely of acoustic renditions of songs that they've done in the past, even though the songs have orchestration as well. It's also the last album they released under Virgin Records. I do enjoy this album, and I hope that Rise Against will do another acoustic album at some point. It's also the fourth album that Rise Against made with a parental advisory warning on the cover. We're almost at the end, no pun intended, and we're going to talk about Endgame. This was the sixth album that Rise Against ever made. I don't know how many times I listened to it, and this album is 10 years old at the time of me making this video. To this day, I still consider it to be some of the band's best material. However, there are two Rise Against albums that I think are even better than this. Now, the second best Rise Against album to me is Wolves from 2017. This was the band's 8th studio album, their first album released under Virgin Records, and their only album that was produced by Nick Raskolinix, who happens to be my favorite music producer. It's also considered to be an anti-Trump album, since most of the songs were made in protest of the Trump administration. And I commend Rise Against for that, since Trump is the worst president that America has ever had the misfortune of having. Now, in order to promote this album, Rise Against went on tour with Deftones. I saw them on the night of June 22nd, 2017. I actually ended up buying this album from Target a week before the concert. One more thing I should mention is that this was the third Rise Against album to have a parental advisory warning on the cover. It was a time when I considered this to be the best Rise Against album, but there is one album of theirs I think is even better. This is it, the grand finale. My number one pick for the best Rise Against album is Nowhere Generation from 2021. This is the most recent album from Rise Against, their 9th studio album, and their first album released under Loma Vista Recordings. I mentioned in my review this album came out 4 months after Loma Vista dropped Marilyn Manson, but no one in the rock or metal communities really gives a shit about Manson anymore, due to the abuse allegations, but that's a different story. Anyways, I mentioned in my review that this album was so well made that, that's impossible for me to skip any of the songs. And I'm looking forward to hearing new material from Rise Against going forward. I'll also be including this album on my list of the best albums of 2021, so look out for that. And that is my ranking of every Rise Against album. That's 11 albums that we went through, 9 studio, 2 compilations. I'd like to give a shout out to the Legit Gamer 91. There's going to be a link to his channel in the description. I recommend subscribing to his channel and checking out his videos. You don't have to tell him that I sent you. He's been very supportive of my work, and he also deserves support. Now is the part where I question you. What do you think of my rankings for every Rise Against album? What's your favorite Rise Against album? What's your least favorite of their albums? How would you rank their albums? Let me know in the comments. If you like the video, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Be sure to hit the notification bell to notify future uploads. Thanks for watching. I'll be back soon with another video.